Redux is the original old-school global state manager for React, but now the creators of Redux offer Redux Toolkit. And on the Redux website, it says Redux Toolkit is intended to be the standard way to write Redux logic, and we strongly recommend that you use it. So moving forward, Redux Toolkit is the modern application of Redux that you should learn how to implement. Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we're going to learn about implementing Redux Toolkit for global state management with React. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. Before we get started today, please understand that this tutorial is not for absolute beginners in React. It is for Redux Toolkit beginners, but you should already have an understanding of React, and at a minimum, you should have already completed a React for Beginners course like the one found on my channel or another one like it. It would also be beneficial if you were already familiar with the built-in React hook useReducer, because it has a lot of the same concepts and terminology that you find in Redux. Overall, Redux is a global state manager that allows you to manage your app state in a single place, which can be very useful. The creators of Redux now recommend implementing Redux through the use of Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit addresses several common complaints about Redux, including complex store configuration, too many added packages, and too much code to implement overall. Long story short, Redux Toolkit is an easier modern way to implement the power of Redux as a global state manager. Today we're going to create a simple example project to learn how to set up Redux Toolkit and get some initial exposure to how it all works. So you can see here in Visual Studio Code I have a basic project set up with very few dependencies, so I've removed the things already that we will not be using. I used Create React App, of course, to create the project. And then in the index.js, I've removed some of the boilerplate code that we don't usually use, the same with the app.js. And in the index.css, I've put in some of my own CSS, but of course you could get this from the source code in the description, or you could just create your own. What we're going to focus on today, though, is the logic of Redux Toolkit. So back at the package.json, I'm going to open up a terminal window, and we're going to go ahead and install Redux Toolkit. Okay, we're going to use npm install, and then we'll put the @ symbol and redux.js/toolkit, and then put react-redux and press enter. And this will install, and as soon as it completes, we'll be up and running. And it's already ready to go. Okay, I'm going to close out of the terminal window, and in the source folder, or the source directory of our file tree, let's create another directory and name this app in all lowercase. Now inside the app directory, we're going to create a store, and we'll just name it store.js. Okay, Redux Store and Redux are kind of used interchangeably. Both stand for a container for JavaScript apps, and it stores the whole state of the app in an immutable object tree. And really the intended pattern for Redux is just to have a single store for your application. Multiple stores are possible, but that is not what is recommended by the creators of Redux. To start our store, we're going to import, and then we want to import configure store from redux.js/toolkit. And after we have that, let's go ahead and just say export const, set the store equal to that configure store. And now inside the configure store, we have an object, and it holds a reducer. And now this reducer is going to be empty for now, but we're going to come back and put in reducers that we create. So we'll just save this file. After creating our store, we need to go back to the index.js and import that. So let's import, and now we'll have store, and let's go ahead and say that is from our ./app and then /store. And besides that import, we also need to import a provider, which will provide this global state to our app. So that comes from React-Redux. And now that we have the provider, if you're familiar with the context API and the use context hook, this looks very familiar because we're just going to wrap the app in the provider. And now we say store equal to store. So we're passing that in. And then we're going to have a closing tag for the provider, of course, and that needs to come after our app. So we're wrapping the app with the provider, and now our store, our global state, will be available to the app. With that complete, we need to create a features directory inside of our source directory. So I'll click for a new directory, and now I want to type features. And now inside of this directory, we're going to create another directory for our counter because we're creating a counter example today. So that is one of the features. And now this counter will have a slice. And the name slice comes from splitting up Redux state objects into multiple slices of state. So a slice is really a collection of reducer logic and actions for a single feature in the app. For example, a blog might have a slice for posts and another slice for comments. You would handle the logic of each differently, so they each get their own slice. So now for the counter, we're going to create a slice. So we're in the counter folder, and I'll create a new file here, and I'll name this counter slice with camel case, so a capital S, .js. We'll start the counter slice with an import, and here we need to import create slice, and it comes from Redux.js Toolkit. And now we're going to create an initial state. So that's exactly what we'll name this const. And here we'll set this equal to count, and we'll just start it with a value of 0. Now after that, we need to go ahead and start to create our counter slice. So I'll just type export const, and now counter slice. We'll set this equal to our create slice that we've imported, and now an object inside of it. It starts with a name. So let's just name this counter. After that, the second argument that will be passed in, or the parameter as we define this, is the initial state. And then after that, we have reducers. And now this is where we would name all of our different actions. This starts to look similar to the use reducer hook that is built in to React already. So if you're familiar with that, that will help. But we're going to create a couple of actions for our counter. One is increment, and now we'll have an anonymous function here that receives the state. And inside this, we'll take the state.count that we defined above in our initial state, and we'll just add 1 to the total. And now I'm going to highlight this, press Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy it down. But remember, we need a comma because this is an object. So we have our increment, and now let's change this increment to decrement, which means we need to change the plus symbol to a minus. And so this subtracts 1 from the total too. So we've created 2 actions inside of our reducer. Now we need to export both our actions and our reducer. So here I'll say export const, and we'll destructure those actions. So we have increment and decrement, and then those are destructured from our counter slice dot actions. And it looks like I need to press Alt-Z to wrap the code. And I'm going to scroll this up so you can see it a little better as well. Actually, I could just press Control-B right now and you can see it all in one line. That hides the file tree. Okay, and at the bottom we need to say export default, and here we'll take our counter slice again that we've created, and this is the full reducer that we export here. So let's save. Now both of these must be exported. If we want to use these actions, we need to export them, and we can see they're available from the counterslice.actions. We also need to export the full reducer because the store will need that. Okay, let's show the file tree again, and now let's go back to the store because we need to import our reducer. So at the top, we'll say import, and this will be counter reducer, and that will be from, now we'll have 2 dots, features, and then counter, and finally counter slice. And I'll press Alt-Z to wrap this code so we can see it all at once. Now that we have the counter reducer, we need to put it here in the reducer object where we save some space for it. So we'll say counter and then counter reducer and save. Now we could easily have other slices that we're importing as well to this same store. So we need to remember that, and you might want to save a comma after each one. And it doesn't hurt to have the comma even if you only have one in here. Now that we've added the counter reducer to the store, it is available to the entire app through the provider that we put here in the index.js, and you can see the provider provides the store. So with that available, let's now create our counter component inside of the counter directory, and we will have that logic available to us. So let's go ahead and create counter with a capital C.js. Now I have React ES7 snippets installed, so I can type RAFCE and press enter, and I get a functional expression component created quickly. So if you don't have that, you might want to look into that extension or just type out this basic stuff right here for our functional component. Now at the top of the file, I want to import, and I'm going to import a couple of hooks from Redux. One is called useSelector, and the other one is useDispatch. And now that I have those imported, let's go ahead and import our actions that we created. So we have an increment and a decrement that we both created inside of that reducer, the counter slice, actually the counter reducer that's in the counter slice. So this will come from the counter slice, which we're already in the folder where it is, so it's easy to navigate to. With the imports complete, let's go ahead and add our state to the component. So here we'll have our count, and we'll set that equal to useSelector. Now inside the selector, we'll reference the state. Now I'll have an arrow, and I'll say state.counter.count. Once again, I can see I'm exceeding the width, so I'm going to press Control B to hide that file tree for now, so we'll just stay in the component and you can see all of the code. Okay, after count is defined, I also want to define the dispatch, and now with the dispatch we'll just set that equal to useDispatch. We're now ready to add some JSX to the code here, so I'm going to eliminate this div that we have, and inside the JSX I'm going to create a section element, and then inside of the section element a paragraph, and the paragraph is just going to display our count state. And after the paragraph I'm going to add a div, and inside the div I'm going to have a button, and this button is just going to have a plus symbol, and then I could copy that down and then create one with a minus symbol. Now both of these need an on click as well, so we'll set the on click equal to, now we'll have an anonymous function, and inside the anonymous function we can call the dispatch, and inside the dispatch we can pass any of those actions we created. So here we'll have the increment, and now we call that inside the dispatch as well. And actually I'll copy this down once again. I should have waited to copy down before. Get rid of that extra button, and now we'll just change this to our decrement, and we'll change that plus symbol to a minus, and that's our basic JSX here for the counter. Now we need to go back to the file tree and to our app.js, and we'll import the counter at the top. So we'll say import counter, and that's not what I wanted. I just needed to import the counter component. So import counter from, and here it will be from features, and then counter, and finally there's our counter file. Okay, inside the JSX we'll just put in the counter component and save. Now we're ready to open up a terminal window with control and backtick, type npm start, and we'll see what happens with our app. I'm going to drag over the Visual Studio Code window so we can see both actually. Here we go. So we've got the code on the left and the app on the right. Hide the file tree so we see more of the code. Okay, plus, that's working just fine. Decrement here, so increment, decrement, everything's good with the basic app function here. And of course, this is a very simple example, so it just shows you kind of how Redux Toolkit is set up and the structure overall for an application. Let's go ahead and add a couple of more actions so you can experiment a little bit with the pattern and see how more actions would be added. I'm going to drag the code back over to full screen, and now that we have that, I'll close the terminal. To add the new actions, we need to go to our counter slice file, And we'll just add more actions right here in this reducers object. So the first one I want to add is a reset, which is simply going to reset everything for us. So we'll have our state, and we'll set this to an anonymous function. And here, the state.count will just be set to 0. So it resets the value for us. Now the next one I want to add will be just a little more complex, but not too bad. We'll call this increment by amount. Now it's going to receive not only the state, but an action. And now inside, we'll go ahead and say state.count, and this is going to be actually plus equal. And now we'll set the action.payload. Once again, this kind of goes back to referencing the useReducer hook because it also has payloads. So here, this will be an amount that we pass in, and it will be in the payload of this function. Now, after we add new actions, we have to remember to go ahead and export those as well. So here we'll export reset along with it, and then increment by amount and save. Now we've already exported our reducer to the store, so we don't need to do that again. We've just added these new actions. So let's just go back to the component and we can put these actions to work for us. So we have increment and decrement, and I'm going to put these on separate lines now. So increment, decrement, and after that we're going to have reset, and after that we'll have increment. If I could spell increment, there we go, increment by amount. And then we'll put that on another line and save that much to get the formatting. So now we have our actions imported, and I'm going to need to do one other import here, and this will be import use state, and there it is from React, because we're going to use that for the amount that we choose to increment by. So now, besides these hooks that we have here, let's go ahead and set up our state for that increment amount. And let's just call it that, increment amount, and set increment amount. Now I'll set that equal to use state, and we'll just start out with a value of 0. I'm going to define one more variable here, and it's just because we're going to use a text input, so we need to verify that we get a number value. So we'll say increment amount, which is the state. And if it is not a number, we're checking it right there, we'll just use the short circuit to set it equal to 0. So we don't get a not a number value returned. And this will ensure we have a number either added, or it will at least be 0 if a number is not in the input. And now a quick function definition, and I'll call this reset all, because I would not only want to reset the state, I want to reset our use state value of the increment amount as well. So we'll say set increment amount, and we'll set that to 0. And then we'll also use our dispatch that will set our global state using the reset action, and that will be set back to 0 as well with that action that we defined. Now let's put these to work inside the JSX. So inside of this section that we've already created, let's go ahead and add an input element. And besides the input, it says type text. I guess that would be okay. Let's put this on another line and tab in. There we go. So besides the text attribute, let's go ahead and add a value attribute to make this a controlled input, and it will have the increment amount that we defined in use state. And then it's going to have an on change, and we set that equal to an anonymous function that gets the event, and then inside of this we'll say set increment amount, and we pass in the e.target.value. So just a traditional controlled input for us. After the input, I'm going to scroll up for some more room. I want to add another div, and then inside the div I'm going to have two buttons again. So I'll have a button, and let's say on this button add amount, and let's go ahead and add the on click here for the button as well. So on click equals an anonymous function, and our pattern before stays the same. So then we call dispatch, and now we'll say increment by amount, which is a little bit longer name for our action, but that's what it is. And then we'll just pass in that add value variable that I defined above. I'm going to press Alt-Z to wrap the code so you can see it all. So we defined add value to make sure that it was a number. So it's either 0 or the number that is input, and that was defined above. But here we're calling our action with dispatch once again. Now I'm going to copy this down, and the on-click here for the second button will be much simpler. We'll just pass in the reset all function that we defined above. And here, instead of add amount, we'll just put reset, just one T, and save. Okay, I'm going to drag Visual Studio Code over to the left, and we can see our component. It now has the new input and the new buttons as well. So any amount that we add here, say 10, and we click add amount, our state is going up by tens. And if we reset, yes, it sets both to 0. See if we can put in a negative number, -2, and we add, yep, that works too. So anything we put in here, and of course an ABC shouldn't work, it should identify, so yeah, it's just 0 there, so that doesn't change anything. So if we go by 2s, we can go back up. All good. So our app is working, and overall this shows you how to implement a simple state and some basic actions and get the whole Redux Toolkit structure up and running. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.